Hello there, I'm Dr. Jill Wener. I am a doctor, meditation expert, tapping practitioner, author, and aspiring anti-racist, which requires constant self-evaluation and examination. And I am here with Adria Kitchens. I'm so excited. She is the program manager of the Equitable Dinners organization that I have been attending these events in Atlanta for several months, and that they've been going on a little bit long, actually since last year, I believe. We'll talk a little bit about that. And she's a senior certified feminine power coach, and just all sorts of wonderful. And Adria, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. What an honor to join you, and with all of the things that you're doing, like tapping, and I didn't even know that. That's awesome.
Oh yeah. Thank you. Yeah,
Yes.
We'll get to your career transition in a little bit. I've definitely had one of my own.
Yeah.
So Adria is just up to all sorts of good trouble. Very active in lots of different ways, and I think maybe we can start with the Equitable Dinners, since that's what brought me to you.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that program, how you got to be involved in it, and what its goal is and what it's doing for our community?
Sure. So Equitable Dinners grew out of a program that we launched last year, actually, called Educator Dinners, and we did that in partnership with several organizations. So there were local members or residents in Decatur who were seeing issues in their school around disproportionate suspensions of Black students.
Mm.
And they wanted to do something about that. And so at the time, I was with an organization called One Small Change, who was founded by Dr. Dietrich Hawkins. And so Dr. Hawkins and Ariel Fristow, who is the founder and artistic director for Out of Hand Theater, and Claire Schick-Snyder, who is a Decatur resident, were all at an event that Ariel was putting on where they have shows in homes. And they Claire started sharing about what was happening. And as they were sitting there, Dietrich shared about her work, her doctoral work around the Chicago dinner model, which brings people together to talk about race and racism. And so out of that, like in 6 months, we created this live event where we brought together 1,200 people and over 120 different dinners using art to really launch our conversation to talk about race and racism. We did that August 25th of last year, and that was pretty amazing to bring all those people together on one night. And after that, we were still passionate about what we do, and we were also getting calls from different communities asking how could they do this in their community. And so we stayed together and we created Equitable Dinners. And our plan was to have live dinners within the city of Atlanta, 500 dinners, 5,000 people this year. And we were really on track to start that process. And then COVID, happened. Right. And so what we recognize is that we still wanted to connect people around issues, especially, with the election coming up and with the things that we were seeing, in the world. And we wanted to continue to connect people. And so we looked at how we could pivot and go online, and we created our Lift Every Voice series that brings people together every third Sunday to talk about race and racism, really the foundation of race equity. And on top of that, looking at health, housing, voting, food. So through different lenses, especially all the lenses that COVID, I think, really amplified during this time of the inequities that exist.
It's such a, for anyone, are people allowed to join who are not in Atlanta, or is this still
Oh, yes.
Atlanta people? Okay.
Well, that's the beauty of being virtual, is
Yeah.
people can join from all over, and we've had people from all over Georgia join us, all over the nation actually, and from about 9 different countries, other countries outside of the U.S., which is pretty exciting. So yes, they can join every third Sunday, 5 to 7 p.m. they can go to our website, equitableddinners.com, and register. And we're excited to have Rashad Robinson this month, president of Color of Change, and we'll have that launched with a play by Paris Creighton. So we're really excited about that.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I'll put the website in the show notes for sure. And for anyone watching who has not been a part of these events, they're stunning. I mean, they're wonderful. There's always a one person play. Is it always a one person play on?
Always a one person play.
Out of Hand Theater is this incredible theater that does pieces of art in people's home, like the performance in people's home, or that's been my experience with it. Maybe one of their ways of doing it. And so there's a piece, a performance that they're always just like so just jaw-droppingly amazing and powerful. And then there's a speaker who is always also incredible. And I always learn so much from these events. And then there's like breakout rooms. So it's a wonderful event. And like you're saying, I mean, I'm so impressed with how you all have pivoted these events from the live events, which were also incredible and also had performance and discussions. But I think you've pivoted so well, and it's something that I know lots of other folks in the community that I know also enjoy. And it's a very diverse group as well, which is hard.
It is.
How do you all balance that? Because there's so many like white people trying to learn about their own stuff, which can be very challenging from what I understand for Black people to be around watching them clamor through it. How do you all balance that, keeping it a space where everyone is learning and growing?
Well, we invite everyone to the space, and really it's people who are of like mind, people who really want to have a conversation, right? And so one of the things that we've enjoyed is having pretty diverse group of participants. So about 60% white, 40% Black, and other people of color as well. And I think probably one of the favorite things I see is the age range that we have, all the way from 18 to like 70 plus, and pretty nice across the board of having those people present. And I think it's just that we put the invitation out there that you are welcome to come and just have a facilitated conversation around race and racism. And people love the art, and adding the speaker really is like this new piece that we added in this virtual environment. So we really want people to get grounded in the story and have the experience, and then get grounded in the facts, right? And use that to really guide the conversation so that people are opened up to what's actually happening, and then they can feel some sense of authenticity and step into some vulnerability around their own their own experiences around race and racism, or their own complicity.
Yeah, it's so perfectly done. I love it.
Thank you.
So the next one is, what's the date?
It is September 20th.
Okay.
5 to 7 p.m. Eastern.
Okay. So how did you there was stuff that came before, but I was reading through your bio, and you used to work at Yerkes. You're a scientist in your background. So how did you go from that work into the work that you're doing now?
Wow, yes, long time ago. That was, when I was in college, I was very focused on being, a doctor. That was what I said I was going to pre-med, right? So what ended up happening is I ended up in research. So, I graduated from Johns Hopkins, and I did research there. And then I came to Yerkes as an intern. I started off as an intern when I was in college during the summers, because I grew up in Atlanta. So I would intern there, and then wonderfully offered a position. And so that's where I began my life. And so for about 9 or 10 years, I was there working in neuroscience. And I think when I look back, one of the things we worked on when I was there was, at the time, was this big story around what people thought was crack, what they call crack baby syndrome, right? And, when I look back on that and seeing how race played into that, like the language of how we were talking about Black mothers, right? And using those things to take their children away from them, which I was not aware of at the time, right? Because I was a 22-year-old student. But that's what we worked, that's what we were looking at, is really some groundbreaking work around how how other things were actually causing the issues that they were seeing in the babies that were born that had more to do with fetal alcohol syndrome or other things that the cocaine was being cut with that were causing the problems they were seeing in the children. And so
So
at the
interesting.
time, we were probably, there were some other research facilities who were coming out with that same kind of information that, they had, so much focused on this whole crack baby idea. But it was the other issues that were that were causing the problems. Not that cocaine is something that people should be out taking,
Right.
but it was the idea that they were actually stigmatizing women around this. And so to be a part of that, when I look back, I was like, wow, I never would have thought of being a part of that at the time and how that would come back to play a role. When I worked with Dr. Hawkins, she did a lot of work in recovery.
Mm.
And so I had the pleasure of being able to start to, look at the peer movement that has happened, and so that whole kind of movement around how we language things and how we talk to people and how we help people recover, like all of that, kind of that transition didn't happen all at once, right? Like I went
Hmm.
through a lot of different steps to get there, but when I look back on my time at Yerkes, it came back to play a role in my life later, in my work, in this field. So that's pretty exciting. Yeah.
Yeah. Did
Hmm.
you did you picture yourself as an activist like growing up? Is that something you always did you grow up around activists, or did you have other people role models? Or because it's such a beautiful thing to be doing with your life. I'm just wondering if
Um,
that was like like in the cards for you in some way, or not something you expected.
that's a good question. So no, I don't think I did, right? I didn't necessarily picture myself as an activist, although I was always doing something. I was always
Hmm.
speaking up at school and like they were tarring the roof of our building, and I was, speaking up about how that shouldn't happen when we were all in school. And I remember doing that at 15 or 16. And so I think it was always there. I just wouldn't have called it activism at the time because I
Yeah.
probably didn't know what that really meant, in high school at the time. So I think for who I am, it was always there. And I remember there was a man in my church, and I remember telling him that I was planning on being a doctor because I grew up in Eastlake, and
Oh, that's where I
a
live.
church. Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, I grew up at Eastlake United Methodist Church, and we had a really kind of family atmosphere when I grew up in church, and so everybody raised you in the church. And I remember him telling me, I said I wanted to be a doctor. He's like, really? I didn't really see that. I saw you speaking to all these people.
Oh,
And that's what he told me. But I remember that statement. I didn't really know what to do with it. At being in high school, he's like, "Are you sure that's what you're supposed to be?" But now that when I think about that, I remember him sharing that with me before he passed. That he saw something different, and so he saw something different in me, and my parents were always supportive of whatever I wanted to do. So I knew they thought I would be doing something, that I would be speaking out about something, even if I was a doctor, right?
yeah. Right, right, right.
I would still be doing that.
I wonder, because I've spoken with a lot of Black women who wanted to be doctors and had
Hmm.
advisors in undergrad tell them that they shouldn't.
Hmm.
And I don't know if that had anything to do, like that, and it's racist. It was never said explicitly, but it was
Hmm.
it was implied with this advice they were getting from the old white man,
Hmm.
telling them, "Oh, you shouldn't do that. That's not something you'll be able to do." Did you experience any of that in your training?
I don't think I experienced that specifically. I ended up in research because as you're looking for internships in college,
Hmm.
um, you look for these places, you never know where you're going to really end up. And I didn't at the time. I was really focused on somewhere in pediatrics. Um, having I think I'd done an internship at the Cap Medical and like uh, the unit that supports the little preemies. And
Oh
I
yeah.
really been impacted by that, and the doctors and the nurses who, at the time it was DeKalb Medical, I think it's Emory DeKalb right now, but I was really impacted by that. So I don't think I had anyone who was turning me away from it. It's just that I ended up in research, and I was really fascinated by kind of how like the underpinnings of all the theories
Yeah.
that you use actually in the medical field. Like, oh, this is where this comes from. Like it was so fascinating for me to figure out, like, people determine what they do based on all of these research studies that we do. Like, this actually means something. This is why
Yeah.
people say,
Yeah.
oh, well, the study says we can go back and do this. And so that became, I think, maybe more important to me, that I recognized how you can really impact medicine and impact everything that we do is based on, this, how we follow our scientific thought and how we get from hypothesis to theory. And so that, I think that probably was more of an influence. And
I
of
love
course, being at
that.
Johns
Yeah.
Hopkins, a lot of researchers, a lot of doctors too at Johns Hopkins, but big research institution. So I think it just
Yeah. If you're
that
going to
just
do research,
fascinates me.
that's like the
That's the
place
place
to
to
do
be,
it.
right?
Yeah. And medicine is its own world of hurt. So I'm actually
Mhm.
like, I always tell people, if there's anything else that you want to do, like do that. If you love medicine and you're quite sure and you're not just saying you still want to do it, even though lots of doctors have told you not to do
Yeah.
it, then in a non-racial context, people are being,
Yes.
it's just like, it's a tough world. So I'm glad that
Yeah.
your decision to not do that was out of passion for something else, which is
It
beautiful.
was. What's funny is my best friend. So my best friend and I, we were both going to be doctors, and she wanted to go into research. She ended up becoming an MD,
Mm. Oh,
and then
nice.
I went into research. And well, I just thought that was funny because we ended up doing the thing the other person
Right,
wanted to
right.
do.
How does she like it? Is she still practicing?
Oh, she's still practicing. Yeah,
All
she's
right.
in Noonan, Georgia, so
Good for
she's still
her.
practicing. Yes. Mhm.
So that's great. So it's funny because it seems like two very different career paths, but the way you what it sounds like what drew you to the research is the impact that it has on the way people live their lives, which is what you're impacting now. So I think that's
Yeah,
such a beautiful
yeah.
parallel.
And I was a
Um,
numbers person, so it was, it's all numbers when you start analyzing data.
yeah, true, true.
Yeah,
How did you get into coaching? So you're a senior certified feminine power coach, and I don't know a
yeah,
lot about that, but I'm
yeah.
a huge fan of coaching, and I'd love to know a little bit more about that. And does that intersect with your activism work? How does that fit in with all the rest of the work that you do?
Sure. So, I actually left something out of my, when you were asking me kind of how I got to where I am. So, shifting from like neuroscience into where I am now, I mean, I became a mother, so I have three beautiful brown children, and I took myself out of the workforce, right? So I stayed,
Okay.
I was probably more of an at-home mother, and then said the best way I could do that is to have my own business. So I started, my own businesses during that time, so I could really support my kids in the best way. And so I always had a passion and a drive to do that. And then when I what I recognized that there have been some experiences in my life that have been traumatic, although I had wonderful, wonderful parents. So those experiences really came to the forefront as, we led into, what was it, around 2007, 2008, we went into the financial crisis.
Mm,
And at the time, I was in commercial real estate and lost everything in real estate
wow.
because the market crashed. And so here I was with three children. I was divorced by that time, with the three kids and raising them. And all of these things came to like this perfect storm of, okay, Adria is not well.
Mm,
Adria needs to figure out what's going on with her. And that's when I found Dr. Claire Zamet, and she's out in California. And at the time, she was still working on her PhD. But this program, Feminine Power, and it was really what I what drew me to it was like, I was like, okay, so I know I'm depressed. I know I have these things happening in my mind and my spirit, and I can't get myself, back together. And
Yeah.
I was looking for an answer. And so that's what came. And it was such a breath of fresh air and so transforming for me, to really find a process and other women who were feeling the same thing, to find a way to really to empower me to for my yeah to create my own healing.
Hmm.
Right, I didn't have to depend on anybody else to do that. Like from that process, it was she was like, no, I'm going to give you the skills and capacities to do this yourself. Right, and that was like
Yeah.
groundbreaking for me. I was like, oh, so I don't have to like go outside of myself to get healed. Right,
Yeah.
I can just do this. I can actually gain the skills to do this myself. And so that's what happened. And I started off with her, and it was so transforming for me that I said that I want to be able to support other women in the same way. And so I went on to her as she was creating programming, like her, what she would call her Feminine Power Mastery program, where you really you're inside of this structure where you really learn how to master your own psychology and your own energy, like what that really means to be able
Yeah.
to navigate life, right? It's not to take yourself out of life. It's like, how do I navigate life and the challenges and the opportunities that come with that? And then I went on to her certification programs and became a certified coach, and have the honor now of being able to, having been able to come, start participating several years ago as one of her senior coaches in her programming, and support the other women who are in her programming, who are taking on her professional certification trainings in coaching, facilitation, and leadership. So, I mean, that was a transformational experience for me. It's an amazing process.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So is it energy work as well? You mentioned energy a couple times. Is it?
Well, I would say it's energy work, right? I think it's all energy work, but probably not as specifically as people might define energy work who are
Okay.
in the field,
Okay.
right? But when we look at, it's really how do I, it's creating from a more feminine, uh, feminine energy. So I guess you
Hmm.
would say that, and not to say female male, but like the difference between our masculine energies, right,
Right.
which is more systems, processes, those things, and that feminine, more creative um, energy, more relational. So relational energies that you would think about how you relate to yourself, how you relate to the universe, God, life, how you relate to other people as being the power um, with which you work from, and based on a foundation. I don't know if you've ever heard of a appreciative inquiry. So it's
A
really
little bit, yeah, but
yeah.
not
So
enough to
and that's
talk
a more
about.
relational kind of a business model, a strengths based approach
Hmm.
of how you look at what's working. So like it's like based on that foundation. If you were to be one of those little geeky people who reads people's dissertations, which I did. But so in reading, it's like, as I learned more about her and her work, I was going through the work like in a practical sense, but it was like learning. It was just like Yerkes, like why I ended up in research. I want to know like the underpinnings of how this actually works,
Hmm.
and looking at those models. So a more relational approach to how we use our power. So power being relational as opposed to power over, power with.
Okay. Okay. I've heard that a lot recently.
Yeah.
We're doing some work with some teachers in my meditation tradition on how to demystify the guru teacher power thing, and
Yeah.
decolonize the practice. So
Yes.
we've been
Yes.
talking about that a lot as well. So
Yes.
it's cool to hear that coming up here as well.
Yeah.
How do you use that work? Do you use that work in anti-racist spaces as well?
All the time, because when I came to work with Dr. Hawkins, I had already been working with Dr. Zamet for many, many years. And I could see how I could use all the things I learned in facilitation and coaching and leadership in this arena, right? How do you create spaces for people to really be able to share authentically and vulnerably about what's coming up for them? And and really having a passion for how I work, how I really support other women of color, because I had had this
Mhm.
transformational experience, right? How do I support women of color in healing our own internalized racism, internalized oppression, through the processes that I had learned through Feminine Power and through what I was learning, inside of Dr. Hawkins's work on race equity, like using all of those pieces. But I definitely use all of those skills in what I do now. Um, a lot of it mixed into my facilitation work, especially.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about internalized racism and internalized oppression? Because I think it's something that a lot of white people they're not aware of, that that's a thing.
Yeah.
And realizing the systemic nature of racism, how it does affect everybody, in ways that we might not even think about, we meaning white
Yeah.
people. So can you talk a little bit about
Yeah.
that? Because I think it's so important for white people to learn about it.
Yeah. So, I don't know if I realized it until, I started really getting into this work, the ways in which we all grow up in the same racist soup,
Mm-hmm.
right? So all growing up in the same racist soup, all of our minds need to be decolonized.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll tell you a story. So in 2014, 2015, I went through this situation with my son where he was accused of this crime at school. And we had to go through the juvenile justice system.
Mm.
And we spent 10 months in DeKalb County juvenile justice. And, going to court, we actually proved he did not do this. We proved actually early on that he had not committed the crime. And even the complainants admitted to lying on the stand.
Oh, wow.
And the judge still wouldn't dismiss the case. Now, this is a Black judge, Black prosecutor. I mean, there were all sorts of, hiding witness statements, all sorts of things that, not my attorney asking for witness statements, those witness statements not being made readily available because
Mm.
they weaken the case. Um, and so finally, after about 10 months, we were able to, the judge dismissed the case, and then she held my son back because she wanted to tell him, well, I really wanted to send you to jail today because I didn't like the way your hair was cut. And so I was sitting there thinking like, what? I'm like, he has been, here's the part of the mom who's like, he has been respectful every time he's been in here. We've had him in a
Oh,
tie, you know, um, tie, dress shirt every time he's been in here. He has not spoken out. It's like all these things that I'm thinking should make him
right.
acceptable to the world. And here's this Black judge telling him this, and it, it was kind of in that moment that I just realized how devastating it is to be a Black person in our criminal justice system. And every time I was in that courtroom, or every time we were in the court, in the building, uh, on Memorial Drive, everybody I saw uh, was alleged to have committed a crime was Black or brown. I
Mm.
saw not one white face.
Yeah.
The only time I saw white faces um, was in traffic court. And I'm thinking, wow, in all of DeKalb County, are you telling me that the only children accused of crimes happen to be Black or brown? That seems odd. Like that seemed really odd to me that nobody else was
Right.
accused of committing a crime. And I share that story because that to me, that is like the clear example of internalized racism, how a system can look at a child regardless of the color of the person who's standing before them or sitting before them, and still say this, and still like really be like intent on this Black child needs to go to jail,
Mm.
even though the complainants admitted on the stand that they lied to the police,
Right.
to their friends, to everybody, because she was the young lady was upset that he had basically, as a 14-year-old kid, did like dissed her, and he didn't want to be with her at all. She created this story, and like none of that mattered. And so like that to me is like the biggest example of internalized racism, that we as Black people will
Right.
look at people who look like us and still think the same way.
Mm-hmm.
as other people. That's racism, right? Racism says that regardless of the color of your skin, like, oh, well, you are more prone to commit crimes, so I need to put you in jail. And so that, for me, I think at that point I was like, okay, so what do I do? Because I felt hopeless, really,
Right.
inside of that, right? That this entire system, I was sitting there thinking, oh my God, like I hadn't even recognized fully experience of my brother being a Black man, right? And my father being a Black man, or all of his brothers who grew up as sharecroppers, right?
Mm.
My dad grew up as a sharecropper in Molina, Georgia. And so it like all came like within that time frame, just came kind of crashing down. And I recognized, wow, the power of a system that would allow us to look at each other that way. And so that's, internalized racism is that, right? Where we take on the beliefs of the dominant culture,
Hmm.
those negative beliefs about ourselves, and we start to believe those and act out inside of them. So that acting out can be acting out against others who look like us. It also taking on those negative connotations, inside of racism. Oh, well, Black people are lazy.
Mm.
Black people don't, they don't want better for themselves. They want to stay in poverty. Oh yeah, they always commit crimes. Like this is all they can do. Like those, like we take on those things as if they are ours, and that's what somebody else is putting on us.
Yeah.
And and it's like, how do we start to release that? Say, wait a minute, no, that's not mine. Like that's
Right.
what you're thinking. That doesn't make it true. Like just because you say that doesn't make it true, but there are ways in which we take all of that on, right? That's trauma, right? To constantly be taking on the beliefs of other people, these negative beliefs about ourselves, and we take them on and say, yeah, you're right. That's who I am, and it's not who we are. Like we didn't enslave ourselves, right? We didn't tell
Right.
ourselves all these negative things. Somebody else told us all these negative things. So hopefully that
Yeah.
was a
No,
good
that was so
explanation.
poignant. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, the story, it sounds like you're talking about 1950s. And for me to even be surprised that that happened, or for anyone
Right.
listening to be surprised, your skin is probably white like mine. And that's, that's the reality that Black people face. And it's very easy to not know that unless you ask, and
Yes.
not to understand what that experience is like, because you don't have to experience. I share a
Yeah.
story of I got pulled over in 2014 for using my phone. I was actually I was voice dictating something, and
Hmm.
blah, 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 blah. Like the cop went back to his car. I was so mad. I got out of my car. I was stretching. I was being super passive aggressive. This is 2014. This was like right when all the videos and police shootings were coming out and it was
Hmm.
happening. And my little white self just didn't think about that at all. And the cop came over and I was like, oh, I just need to tell you the background, but it's just a funny story why I was voice recording. And he's like, oh, I was thinking of an idea for a book I wanted to write. He said, oh, you're a writer?
Hmm.
I said, no, I'm a doctor. And he was like, you should have told me, I don't ticket doctors. I mean, it was the most ridiculous. And then thinking about, would any of that interaction happened if
Right.
I had been Black? No,
Right.
I mean, I wouldn't have done what I did. I wouldn't have said what I said. I wouldn't have been able to,
Right.
and the cop would not have reacted that way. And so
Right.
I think, thank you so much for sharing that story. That
Yeah.
this sounds like a very painful experience for you, but I think um, so helpful for people to understand not only the lived realities, but the mental trauma that
Yeah.
is caused by that internalized
Yeah.
racism.
Yeah.
How do you help people get out of that? How do you, like, I mean, I guess you
Well,
don't give the secrets of your coaching sauce, but I mean, how does that, is that it's, I mean, and it's, I mean, I'm reading Stamp from the Beginning, and this whole idea
mhm,
that Black people are lazy. I mean, that was created to justify slavery in the
right.
1600s. So that's something that's been perpetuated and totally like, I don't want to say a paradox, that's not the right word, but like, while at the same time enslaving people who
More like an
are working very
oxymoron,
hard, not Simone, thank you,
right?
then calling them lazy,
Yes,
but you're
yes,
enslaving them because they're working harder and they're,
right,
you know, you think that they have a different pain threshold. You know, it's none of it ever made sense, but it's still there generation after generation.
right,
So
right.
how does one begin to heal from that?
So, part of that is why we do the dinners, right?
Yeah.
So that we can hear the stories and experiences of other people, um, and and have that impact them in a way that just giving them the facts would not.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's not like people don't know racism is wrong or that it exists or that people are having adverse experiences in racism. It's been around for years. People know it. It's just that it hasn't changed anything. But people's stories, really impact and change people. And that was one of the reasons that I loved Dr. Hawkins' work, because it did give me hope. It was like, oh, you can share a story with someone and it can impact them. Um, and so, especially in this work, right? And and then I was able to see how I could bring in my feminine power work around how we really connect back to ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it was like in connecting back to myself and really seeing myself and um, the beauty and the warmth and the wonder of who I am, right? That I was able to release all these other ideas that other
Mm.
people put on me about who I was not, right? But it really, so it's really in being able to um like really go deep within ourselves, right? And start to shift these out sometimes external and internal beliefs, right, that we hold,
Mm-hmm.
and really have that deep connection that allows us to like push past that and say, you know what, that's not actually true. Like what's really true is that, like I am here to contribute to the world, and I do have something. I do work hard, and right,
Mm-hmm.
and I have been this person who really stands up for other people. Um, and it like that's the process, it's like a really amazing process of just recognizing that in yourself, which I think we as Black people, in many ways, we haven't had the opportunity to do
Yeah.
that. We've been in so many ways stuck in survival mode. We think
Mm-hmm.
because we see a lot of Black people doing well that, all Black people are doing well. And at the end of the day, a lot of that is that we're the exceptions. And that there are a lot of people who look like me who are unfortunately still in poverty
Mm-hmm.
around the world, right? In this country and around the world. And that says something, right? So that, you would think everything's okay and everything's actually not okay,
Yeah.
right? And
So
so,
far from okay. Yeah.
right, so far from okay, which we as Black people have to take on. Like I as a Black person had to take that on, like, oh my God, that's what I realized when I went through the situation with my son.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, we're not okay. Like what would have happened? Like it just we had the privilege of he had the privilege, sorry, of having two parents who, although divorced, like the entire family came together to he and my former husband, we came together to make sure he had one of the best attorneys, in this, probably, in the country, but definitely in the state of Georgia,
Mm-hmm.
represent him. We had the money to be able to do that. He had his family his family was there at every hearing.
Right.
His uncles and aunts were sitting in the courtroom. And, what's interesting is in that process, the prosecution tried to make it look like it was a negative thing. Oh, they're just here to intimidate these people, as opposed to look at all the support. You see how that gets turned around in
Right.
racism.
Oh yeah. Wow.
Like, oh, like in any other situation, it would look like, you're being supportive and he has his family around him, where it gets turned around that, oh, they're here to intimidate. It's like, intimidate.
Right.
Like he needs support in this courtroom.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sorry, I forgot your question.
No,
I'm like, answer that.
I don't even know. Oh, I was asking how you heal that internalized
Oh, how I heal
oppression,
that.
but
Right.
I'm loving everything you're saying. So,
Yeah.
um, can you talk a little bit about so John Lewis, our
Yes. Yes.
congressman passed, and there's this quote about good trouble that everyone has been quoting. It's like turned into, it's such a beautiful quote. And I read a blog post of yours where you dissected it a little bit and analyzed it a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I love what you had to say.
Oh, sure. So I think that's probably one of the gifts that has come out of my work in feminine power is this idea of being able to hold paradox,
Mm,
right? So inside of systemic racism, right, it can be overwhelming because that's where I was when I was
mhm,
dealing with my son. It can be overwhelming, but it's like, can we hold, struggle and triumph at the same time? You know, the fact that we're in this really horrible system and really hope for something better
mhm,
at the same time. Can we look at peace? I think because I was talking about the paradox of peace, right?
mhm,
That we look at peace as if nothing bad, negative is happening, there are no struggles. And maybe that's not what peace really is, right? Like you could still have peace and still have people protesting,
mhm.
right? We assume that we're in the wrong place, that we're not at this peaceful place because people are protesting. And I think one of the gifts that comes out of really being able to stand, feminine power is about being able to hold these really big things all at the same time,
Mm,
right? That's the difference, right? The inside of a masculine power system, there is no room for paradox, right? It's one way or it's one way, right?
mhm.
We build a house this way, right? There's
Yeah.
systems and processes in place, and this is how we do it. But inside of a feminine power structure, a power system, you can hold paradox. You can hold, I think about I have three beautiful children who are all grown now. But I think about birth, right? That inside of pain, there was something really glorious coming at the same
Mm.
time.
Oh,
And
yeah.
like that's paradox, right? Like you hold all those things and those can only be held inside of a space that really allows for you to stretch and move and not get everything right, be a little messy,
Yeah.
not be perfect. Everything doesn't have to be a straight line because it's not linear,
Hmm.
right? And so that's what I was really speaking to, right? That so for me, like good trouble means it's like holding the paradox that you can have trouble and that can be good,
Hmm.
right? Like it doesn't have to be a negative connotation, that we really should always be holding these tensions, and we always are, right? And to be able to create the context for people that it's okay for those tensions to be present. It
Hmm.
doesn't mean that we can't get to where we need to go
I love that.
inside of that,
Yeah.
right? It's like the butterfly, right?
Mm.
The caterpillar like goes all to mush. And I mean, if I were the caterpillar, I would think, I don't know, I would be thinking, oh my God, what is happening with my life? Like life is really not working out for me right now. But when you go into this cocoon, it doesn't seem like this is working. But it's like at the end, then we look at the butterfly as being the most beautiful part of that, but the caterpillar and the butterfly were all in the same DNA,
Yeah.
right? That was the whole paradox. At the same, they were all present at the same time. All of those things, and you still get to the beautiful butterfly that we call, like beautiful and we.
I love that. I love that. It's so inspiring. And it's a very, mindful. I don't know if you do mindfulness work explicitly, but that's such
Yeah,
a like holding
yeah,
it all and having that be okay and not necessarily, yes, making change. Yes, trying
yes,
to make society better,
yeah,
but not, not trying to micromanage or fix every little thing that's happening in the
yeah,
moment and seeing the beauty in that.
yeah.
Um, can you talk a little bit about the Institute for Equity Activism?
Yes, yes. So I'm really excited about that because that we just launched in July, and that came out of really both my work with in feminine power and then my work with Dr. Hawkins was how do we really help people prepare to be even to really understand what activism is, to have the skills and the tools that they need to
Mm,
actually go into their communities and create good trouble, right? So as a part of Out of Hand Theater, which I had to, have the joy now of being a part of their team starting this year, we looked at how can we really support the people who are coming through our Equitable Dinners and our facilitators with those skills and people who are really wanting to know what to do. So we created this institute to really ground them in appreciative inquiry, right? Like, how do we look at race equity as a strengths-based approach so that we have something that we can move towards, as well as really grounding them grounding them in, using the arts as an activator for getting people grounded and all on the same page in their experience. So, the arts is the one place like we can come together without using words many times, that people can really come into the space and have like this real emotional tie to what's happening and have an experience of it. And we don't have to wait for a story, someone to share a really compelling story, because we create one. And so that was really the impetus behind creating the institute. And so they get grounded in AI, not artificial intelligence, but appreciative inquiry and cultural competence. So understanding it's really even bigger than race, right? There are all these other things. Although our focus is definitely race equity, right? We feel like that's the foundation for everybody. So we really ground them in race, and then using the arts to help to really support them, and then taking them through some aspects of transformational facilitation, like not just teaching people, but really creating a container and space where people can have a transformation experience. And so they're in small groups as well. So they have a small group experience where they're creating a group project, and they have to learn how to distribute their resources equitably, how to look at what to do in their community equitably. How do we do that, in groups? Because that's that's that relational power piece that comes from my feminine power work. Like, how do we really relate and collaborate with one another to have an even bigger impact than we could have by ourselves?
That's amazing. So is that like a cohort go through it at the same time? How long is that program?
So it's over 3 months. They commit to 1 weekend a month, as well as they commit to being in a small group over a 2.5-month period, where they're working together to create a project and distribute a small amount of money equitably. They can either invest in one project or they can invest in all three, and then they will come back together for what we are calling like their capstone. So it's like a capstone project, right? Their capstone slam, where they will share out their projects and share what they're doing in the community, and hopefully be able to get some additional funding for what they're doing.
That's incredible. When does the next cohort start? Not that I want to do this program. It was started in July, so it's August. It's September now. So
yes. So we're looking at the next cohort starting in January.
Okay.
So that will be the next cohort. We would love to, obviously dealing with seasonal activities and being amid COVID, we thought that it may be best to wait until January to start our next cohort. So our hope is within the next two cohorts that we have at least 100 people in these next two cohorts. So we were actually really honored that the Arthur Blank Foundation sponsored our pilot of our first cohort. So we're really excited about that.
That's amazing. That's amazing. It sounds incredible. I'm so fascinated. So all these links are going to be in the show notes, but because you gave several of these websites, so that's great. So I'm going to check that out for my own self, but for anyone listening, you could check it out as well. So we're about out of time. I don't know how. I know how it went so quickly because you have so many wonderful things to share. But how do people find you, work with you? All the things. What are some websites and social media handles that you want people to take note of?
Sure. So I would love for people to join our Equitable Dinners Facebook community, because whether you've been to a dinner or not, we are all about courageous dialogue. So we want people to join there, and we provide resources. There's so many links and things that are provided in there and events, and we love people to join there so we can continue and launch different conversations. So you can find us on Facebook on our Equitable Dinners page, and in our group, our Equitable Dinners group, our Equitable Dinners community for courageous dialogue. And then our Institute for Equity Activism, that's instituteforequityactivism.com. And then my coaching is at coachadria.com. And
Awesome.
you're welcome to come to any of those websites or find me. I'm on Twitter as well, as you
I
as you well
I
know.
found you. Yes, yes, and that's where I saw
Yeah.
all your great blog posts. So so yeah, definitely follow Adria and check out all these spaces and register for the next event as well for the Equitable Dinners, which is going to be on the 20th. So
Yes.
Adria, thank you so much for agreeing to speak with me. We had a very brief
Thank
interaction
you.
after the last event, and I was like, "Hey, want to come on my podcast?" And you were like,
Thank
"Okay, strange
you.
lady, sure." So I really appreciate that. It was such a lovely conversation, and I've,
Yeah.
as always, have learned so much. And it went in places that I don't know if we were expecting to go, but that's the beauty of these conversations
Yes.
and in general conversations with somebody you don't even know that much, and then
Yes.
getting to hear their perspective and what has shaped and formed them. So thank you again. Have a wonderful rest of your, I guess this is Labor Day weekend, Labor Day
Yeah.
Monday. So have a
Yeah.
wonderful rest of your day. Thanks for taking the time to speak with me.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here. And I look forward to hearing even more about your work.
Um,
There's lots that can be done with healing racism inside of your other work, your meditation and tapping.
oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks so much, Adria.